So, good morning, everyone. Oh, this was loud today. You hear me? That's okay? Good. So I'm not disturbing all the researchers sitting here around, even if one of them is here today. So warmly welcome. I would like to ask you all, if I say the word entrepreneur, what do you think of? What shows up in your mind? Yeah, you're pointing at someone, yeah, definitely. What do you think of? Elon Musk. Stereotype, exactly. And I think and hope that when we say, what do you think when I say entrepreneur, that you might think a little bit different after this morning. I hope so. Even though it's good to think of Elon Musk as well, of course, as a role model, in one way. But today's speaker is going to tell us some more about what you actually can, what happens after your education in entrepreneurship, and how do you need, the topic is, do you need to have a startup to be an entrepreneur? And the person himself has actually been a student at Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship, and has also founded a cleantech startup. What's happening today? And now he decided to find out more about what's actually happened with the entrepreneurial minds. So we are going to listen to Martin Stockhaus, today's speaker. Welcome.
Thank you.
And also good for you to know is that we are recording this, as always, at Morning Boost. So you find the, if you want to see it afterwards and listen once again, you can always find the seminars from Morning Boost at our at YouTube, if you're looking for Chalmers E-village. Good, thank you, welcome.
Thank you. Does everybody hear me all right? Great, okay. So thank you for the nice introduction. My name is Martin Stockhaus, and this Monday I defended my licentiate thesis, which is called A Career Beyond Startups, Entrepreneurial Competences in the Careers of Venture Creation Program Graduates. So, yeah, quite a long title, but as Madeleine just said, we can perhaps reframe it as, okay, if I don't want to have a startup, but I still identify myself as being an entrepreneur, what can I do then in my career? So a little bit about me. I'm an alumni, graduated in 2019, and I was the co-founder of NunView, which was a cleantech startup generated from the School of Entrepreneurship as well. Currently, I'm a PhD student at the Division of Entrepreneurship and Strategy. And my research focus is on what happens after a education in entrepreneurship, but also interested in if we can reframe it from just looking at startups, but can we use other perspectives to nuance the whole picture of what entrepreneurship is. So what led up to this study? Well, you can look at the literature and find different patterns there, but there are some practical things that led up to why I'm interested in this subject. First of all, me being an alumni from the School of Entrepreneurship, I had to reflect upon my first career choice and thinking about, okay, I am going to abandon my startup and in which I've had embedded a lot of my identity. So I had to really think about, okay, I'm going to have an academic career instead. What does that mean? Am I still an entrepreneur or not? Then there was a joint research project by Chalmers, Lund, and NTNU, which revolves around what happens after you had a education in venture creation programs. All of these universities have venture creation programs, so there was a joint effort okay, can we collect our resources and our minds and try to see if we can make some interesting studies around this. And also the descriptive question that, okay, if we have 25% of the graduates are self-employed, what do the rest 75% do? We were a bit unsure. We didn't actually know. So that's why I'm doing this study. So this is the message we typically get. This slide is a little bit old now. But when we are talking about the impact of entrepreneurship education, but also where you can find entrepreneurs. We often get these images of the success stories. I mean, these are wonderful, very inspiring, but there are not many people who actually involve themselves in these. Most of the people who are working entrepreneurially are doing something else. So how can we then reframe what a entrepreneurial career is if it's not working within a startup? Well, if we dive into the literature, and the literature is very big and very complex to navigate, but we can find some patterns there. First of all, the entrepreneurial career is considered to be multifaceted and very like, oh, you can do everything you want, basically. But when you're actually studying it, we are focusing on startups, only startups. So we have like a pitch about entrepreneurial career that is like, it's amazing and big. But when we are actually studying it, we are so setting our frames so tight that we perhaps do not see all the possibilities. Why do we need to study the entrepreneurial career? Well, in recent years, entrepreneurship education has risen in importance, both in numbers, but also in the people who want to go to an entrepreneurship education. Also, there is critical questions about, as I showed on the previous slide, about if we have only 25% self-employed, do we actually capture the value of the entrepreneurship education? And how can you study the entrepreneurial career? Well, that's where the problem comes in, because as you probably have already figured out, I didn't want to focus on startup creation. I wanted to try and expand the whole frame. So I stumbled upon this concept of competence. And I think all of you have some kind of relation to what competence is. So I was thinking, okay, if you go to an entrepreneurship education, you're probably developing a competence, and it should be associated with entrepreneurial activities. But if you are using those competences in another setting that is not a startup, perhaps you are then entrepreneurial if you are using entrepreneurial competencies. So this is just a very confusing slide I see right now. I did this this morning. But we can perhaps group entrepreneurial competences in knowledge and skills related to the entrepreneurial process, judgmental ability and decision-making related to entrepreneurial action, and social skills and networking abilities. If we try to break them down, you can quite imagine that all of these are widespreadly used in startups. But I was thinking, can we take these same activities and ask people who are not involved in startups, are you using this? Is this relevant to you? Is this important to you? And the ones we are asked were the graduates from the Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship, but also from the venture creation program at NTNU and Lund University as well. And as you can see here, there is actually quite a big population. I mean, almost 1,500 people who have had this kind of programs. And if you think about what a venture creation program is, it's really like a very elaborate and deep diving experience into entrepreneurship, because it's not a 6-week course or something like that. It's actually you're dedicating 2 years of your life to this program. So in some way or another, you are very invested into what you imagined your career will look like while choosing to become an entrepreneur in your education. So let's dive in a little bit to the Chalmers case. If you just look at the numbers, Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship have different tracks. We have the ICM track, the Corp track, and the Venture Creation track. And if you look at the numbers, you can quite see that there is a lot of people going to the Venture Creation track. So, but most of these people, if we take the next slide, and now I realize I did choose bad colors on this. Sorry for that. But we can see here that the number of employed people is around 60%, and the self-employed people are around 25%. So if we go back to the other slide, this doesn't really match if all of the venture creation students went into having self-employment later on. there is a mismatch in numbers here. If we then ask the people who are employed about, okay, how much of your time are you using entrepreneurial competences? And we frame this as the question of to what extent are your work dependent on leading idea development for new business activity or being involved into the implementation of new business activity? And as you can see here, there is around, depending on if you see it as my main responsibility or to a considerable degree, you can see that we have around 66% who are actually saying, well, I'm employed, but working with new business activity is my main, the thing I'm doing when I go to work on Monday, basically. So then I start to elaborate a bit on the research questions, and I went into these three ones, which are basically what are the archetypes of entrepreneurial careers in which entrepreneurial competences are applied, meaning that if creating startups is a career which spans over a longer period of time. For example, you are becoming a portfolio entrepreneur or a serial entrepreneur. Can we find some patterns in those who are employed, and if they have a similar sequence of jobs and how they are developing their roles? Research question number 2, how do graduates of integration programs apply knowledge and experience developed from the entrepreneurship education? And I think this is very important because this builds the bridge towards between the education and also what you do in your career. Is there a mismatch there? Is there do you have use of the competences that you develop while having a startup project in your education? And the last one is what is the role of entrepreneurship education in forming these specific career trajectories? So summary of the papers that I've been working on, and I tried to relate them back to the research questions I just talked about. Well, can we find some archetypical careers beyond creating startups? Yes, we can. We have the venture builder, which is probably the person you're thinking about when we are thinking about Elon Musk, for example, or Bill Gates. Like the people who are starting ventures, they can perhaps have it as their legacy building, in which they are like, I'm gonna have this venture, this is my baby, and I'm gonna dedicate my career towards this venture. Or I have like, I'm starting this venture, I develop it, but now I want to try something new. And you do that in sequence. So the venture builders, so to say. Then we have the entrepreneurs. And these people are mostly within the corporate setting. They are using the same, to the same extent they use the entrepreneurial competences that their venture builder peers are doing as well. And then we have the surrogates. And surrogates are an interesting kind of people because they are taking on projects, for example, within startups, in a very specific growth phase, and they specialize within that growth phase. For example, we in one of the interviews we had in our studies, we see that we have a person who is very becoming an expert in clinical process within biotech ventures, for example. So that person jumps between projects in need of that person's specific competences. So what we can see also in research question 1 and related to the papers that I have is that entrepreneurial careers include more than a narrow measure of creating and running a startup. Since we have both the entrepreneurs and the surrogate as well. If we go to research question 2 then, we can see that the applied competences were on par or at least higher than for almost all competencies. Yeah, so if we look at the competences developed during their education, if like built into the concept of competences is also that you should develop them while going forward. It's not a stagnant process, it's a developing process as well. And we could see that the competences that the students had started to develop during their education had been increasing while they were out in their career. So in the education, we get the wheels running, so to say, and then they go off by themselves. Also, there are stronger similarities and differences in these applied competencies, and this is very interesting. I mean, if we erase the label of the entrepreneur and the surrogate and the venture builder, and we just mix them into a pot, it would be near impossible to say you are a self-employed person or you are a corporate person. Very difficult, just looking at the entrepreneurial competences. And I think this is really a interesting finding, because in a way then, we are creating people who are, or the entrepreneurship education is aligning people for doing venture creation beyond only creating startups. And that was also one of the findings in research question 3 then. I'll jump forward instead. So just to capture a bit of the findings, and I've captured them in 3 main areas, which is the mismeasure of occupational choice, archetypes of entrepreneurial careers, and that VCPs shapes career socialization and orientation. Well, if you go into the first one then, as I have already perhaps let you into, is that just looking at occupational choice, both from a research perspective, but also on a policy perspective, when we're talking about the greater value of educations, greater value of ecosystems and things like that, it's perhaps not a good measure to only look at how many startups are created. We should instead focus on how many entrepreneurial individuals do we have in these educations and in these ecosystems. We have more careers than just creating startups. These archetypes of entrepreneurial careers are careers that are sustainable over time. The people that we have asked this question, the people that we have studied, they are having careers that are 20 years long now, because Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship started in 97. So we have asked the people who were there in the beginning and in the first 10 years about their career history, and we can see a remarkable consistency in how they transition between roles and how they view their identity as being entrepreneurs. We have people who are saying, yeah, I wanted to be continuing with my startup, but hey, I had a kid on the way, and me and my partner wanted to get married, and we wanted to get a house. I mean, we need a salary to get a loan from the bank. So it's not a surprise that these people are actually prioritizing having a more stable employment, but still want to develop their competencies and still viewing themselves as being entrepreneurial. And the last one then, the greater value of entrepreneurship programs is not only in what's in the curriculum, like what are the courses we're having. It's also that we are sitting at the same lunch table, we are sharing experiences, we can compare, we are creating networks that we are having a great value in our futures. So that is also a very important part of the whole entrepreneurship education as well. So some values and implication of my research then. Okay, entrepreneurial or trained and competent individuals beyond self-employment is they are valued co-workers, for example. They are driving innovation in corporate settings. So they are a very crucial and important thing that perhaps we haven't really pinpointed exact how they can be offered to the industry. But there is a need within the industry, because these people are often very sought after, and they are giving, they have been given a lot of autonomy and a lot of resources in order to do their innovation projects within their corporate programs. Entrepreneurship education can level the playing fields. Yeah, because one of the findings that we had was that is it important that you have a history of creating startups before you go into the education? No, it's not important. It doesn't set the, how can I say, It doesn't set the rules for what you can do after your education. And also, it's not that important that you are being born into an entrepreneurial family, because you set your own trajectory, so to say. And archetypes of entrepreneurial careers, as have previously been discussed as being serial entrepreneurs or portfolio entrepreneurs, they can now have company of the entrepreneur and the surrogate as well. So most of this material is from my licentiate presentation, so I just added this slide very quickly in the morning, taking it away a bit from the research perspective of this presentation, but more down into the key insights beneath the surface then. So when we are thinking about entrepreneurship education, we're often primed to think about creating startups. But what we have found is that the people who are, due to that they perhaps are prioritizing other things after their education, they are having entrepreneurial careers as well. It's not often, if you go into LinkedIn, for example, that you find, hey, come and have an entrepreneurial career at our corporate setting. If they would do that, that would be very interesting to see. But these people who are entrepreneurs, they're often going into their corporate setting and building their niche within their corporation. But often their managers, for example, are quite early catching on, hey, I have a great resource here. I'm going to give this individual the autonomy and resources that he or she needs in order to create value within this company. So that is something very interesting. And that's because entrepreneurial competence is a broadly sought after competence, but it's not often, how can you say, it's difficult for both the company that seek these competences to frame what they are really after, but when they actually have it, they are quite happy that they have it. And also there are potentially more similarities than differences in being entrepreneurial and being an entrepreneur. I struggle a bit with these typologies or how you are naming things. I think perhaps an entrepreneur is someone who is within a startup, but being entrepreneurial, that everybody can claim to be that if you are doing activities that you associate with being entrepreneurial. I really like this quote also from the interviews that we have done. That was conducted between 2017 and 2021, is that I am capable is one of the takeaways that many of the students had. Like, when we asked them what was the real value of entrepreneurship education, now looking back 10 or 15 years ago, and they said that perhaps difficult to frame one activity that was really crucial for me, but it was more about being in that setting, learning that I am capable of doing things. So that was a real big takeaway. And also, venture creation is not only a vessel for learning, and it's not only a vessel for creating startups, but it is a vessel for actually training people to become entrepreneurs in a wider setting. That's it for me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. And I'm so happy to see all of you here. It was very fun to present this for you. Thank you.